So what I was looking at when I was trying to develop this ASD student profile, I was looking around at the sorts of things that we had already in schools, and then trying to find something to fill a gap. So the sorts of things that we already had, there's screening tools for autism. So in my practice I use the Australian scale for Asperger's syndrome. I send that out to schools, and then I send my profile as well to get more individual information about the student. And schools also will do individual education plans, or sometimes they're called learning support plans, or there's lots of different names for them. Basically it's where everybody gets together and talks about what we're trying to do and how we're going to do it. There's also incident reports. They tend to happen when things go pear-shaped at school. So hopefully they'll have information about who was there, when it happened, why, not necessarily why it happened, but the sorts of things that were going on at the time that the behaviour occurred. And so after a while, if you collect up a number of these incidents, you can start to look for patterns and triggers and try and prevent the behaviours. And then that should lead into a behaviour plan or a crisis plan. Now, the thing I find in schools often is that the behaviour plans are usually only generated following a crisis, and so it tends to be about describing the crisis and how to respond in a crisis, and not so much of the preventative strategies. So I guess that's really what I wanted to focus on more of in the ASD student profile, was to get teachers thinking more about the preventative strategies rather than waiting for a crisis to occur and then thinking, oh, I better do something. Because it's much more effective, and certainly there are less injuries for everyone involved if we, instead of running around trying to put out fires, if we actually take the matches away. Okay, so the sorts of strategies that are already happening in schools, visual timetables, forewarning of changes, having visuals for communication and social skills and behaviour, using social stories, and there's more of a movement now, I think, for having sensory toys, so that kids have something to fidget with so that they can sit through boring assemblies and things like that. And also modifying and adapting activities to make them more autism friendly, so making them more visual, but also I think thinking about the language of exams, for example, and actually asking the question that we really want to know rather than so cutting down the question, I guess, so that the questions aren't so confusing for everybody. And that benefits not just the children with autism, but the other students as well. Okay, so when I was looking at this ASD student profile, I was trying to make a flexible tool that could be used in a few different ways. So firstly, I wanted a tool for passing on information and strategies from one teacher to the next, mainly at the end of the school year, because what we find often in schools is it takes most of first term for kids to settle in, and then we start to make progress in terms 2, 3 and 4, or terms 2 and 3 if you're on a three semester year. And then there's a loss over that Christmas holidays. Kids have gotten out of their routine, and then when they come back they have a different teacher, there's different kids in the classroom, they might be in a different part of the school, they might be using different toilets, they might be playing in a different part of the playground, and because they have trouble generalising their skills, often things they were able to do last year they have to relearn to do them this year. So anything that we can do to make that transition smoother, the better, so that the teacher, if they have information coming in about what the students like and what they were up to last year, that can help them to prevent those behaviours in the beginning and make life a bit easier for the student. I've also found in working in schools that you have very experienced teachers who are often the most popular teachers because they've incorporated autism strategies into their normal teaching style, and so they tend to use visuals and pre-warn of changes and all of those sorts of things just as their normal way of going about business. And so if the next teacher asks, so what are you doing differently, they'll say, oh, nothing special, but in fact everything they're doing is special. And so having something where it actually prompts them and asks, do you use visuals, do you use social stories and those things, they'll go, oh yes, oh I do that, oh I do that too. But they make it in a way so that it's for the whole class, and they forget, not necessarily forget, but they're not thinking of it as an extra thing, because they just think that all the students deserve that information, and they've seen the benefits for kids who have ADHD, for kids who are anxious, for kids who are too busy chatting to the person next to them and miss the instructions the first time. They can use those visuals as well. And it's certainly, when you decrease the anxiety in the whole class, everybody's happier and learning happens. So there's those experienced teachers who aren't passing on information because they kind of take it for granted and forget there was a time when they weren't doing those things. And then you have the inexperienced teachers who may not know what to ask about. So the ASD student profile gives them some things to find out about. It's a bit of a prompt. Okay. So the profile can also be used for passing on information to substitute teachers, and that's another one of those times that's really stressful for kids with autism. As soon as they have a substitute teacher, they're out of their routine, and even if they try really hard to follow the routine, it still looks different because it's a different person. So the more information we can give to substitute teachers, the better. And I'm aware that in high schools, often substitute teachers come in with 5 minutes to prepare, and they might have 8 different classes in a day and be on playground duty and do 2 different places during that day. So it's a lot to ask them to get to know every student they might come in contact with. But even if we can give them a foot in the door, that would be preferable. So that's why I put the interests first. We've been talking about leading with our strengths, and so if you can tell a substitute teacher this is the boy's name and he really likes snakes, then if the substitute teacher asks them to tell them a bit about snakes, they've already got them on their side, and so they're going to be much more willing to listen to the substitute teacher. I've also had families that have used it when they're transitioning to a new school to introduce their child, whether that's they're moving house or going from primary school to high school or from preschool to school. So it's actually been used by preschools as well. And it's also useful for camp leaders, soccer coaches, all those sorts of people that may not have all of the information about the diagnosis. I purposely made it so it doesn't have autism plastered all over it. It just talks about the kids' strengths and areas where they need support. So families are actually comfortable giving this information out to a wider range of people, whereas they might only want their diagnostic report to be in the school counsellor's filing cabinet. Okay, so another reason why I made it, and that was really for me, was to be able to get information from schools as part of the diagnostic process, because we know that the best practice in terms of diagnostic assessment is to look across 3 different areas. So when we use the ADOS, we get information about how the child performs in the clinic and their eye contact and social smiling and all those things. When we do the ADIR, we get information from the parents about the child's whole life, basically. It's a 2-hour memory test for parents, basically, on everything that's ever happened with their child. And then what I do is get information from school as well. So sometimes practitioners will ask school to send some observations, but that might range from a huge list of the sorts of things they're worried about to an observation of them at assembly and they sat nicely. So it's not always the information that we need. So I thought if I develop something like this, then I'm going to get the information that I'm after. So lots of service providers can use it. It's not just for psychologists. Okay. So we've talked about the crisis prevention rather than just crisis management. And often that's about getting to know the student the best you can and not losing that information. Okay, I think lastly, the other reason why I wanted to develop this profile is that I'm often working with adolescents, particularly, and sometimes older primary students who are high functioning and who really want to know what's going on for them. So I'll have a conversation with them about their strengths and areas where they need support. And sometimes the parents give me permission to mention an A word, and sometimes they don't, but we can still have that same conversation just without the A word. So we can talk about everybody's good at some things and not others. You're really good at fish, and you're not so good at making friends, and that's okay. And I'm really good at this, and I'm terrible at sport. So I'll give those kinds of examples. I think the difficulty that a lot of students have is that school often asks kids to be all-rounders and to try a bit of everything. And as they get older, the benefit is that they can start narrowing down and picking subjects that are more interesting to them. But this tool can actually be a really nice way of having a conversation with kids about what have they noticed about how they learn. What are the things that stress them out? What are the things when they're in a class with a teacher that they like? What is the teacher doing to make things easier for them? So that we can pass that information on. And I've actually had teenagers provide that information to their teachers, which is very empowering. Okay, so I wanted something that was quick and easy to use, because if you make it too long, it's not going to happen. So I went for a ticker box format, and I used the I language so that kids could actually fill it in about themselves, and I tried to make sure that I wasn't using any blaming or judgmental language. I've mentioned that I put the interest first. I wanted to include sensory sensitivity because that's an area that's often overlooked in education. Teachers often forget that their students may be completely frustrated with the join in the carpet and how the lines don't quite line up, and that can stop them from being able to listen in class. Or there's building works going on. I know that the education revolution has been very good in providing halls, but it's also meant a lot of noise and toing and froing in schools. So there's all those sorts of things, and that's included as well. Okay, so I started this process back in 2009. At that time, I was writing a training workshop for teachers, a 2-day workshop, which I ran in Newcastle. And I asked 28 teachers as part of the workshop to fill in the profile, to hand it over to the person beside them, hopefully someone not from their school, so that they didn't already know about them, and to see if they thought this was something that they could use in their school, and also to give me comments on how it could be improved or things that needed to be changed. So the feedback, luckily, was overwhelmingly positive. The suggestions that were made, which I thought were great, were to add comments in each of the sections, and it'll make sense in a second, and to specify what an outburst would look like. So to get more specific about the challenging behaviours, or behaviours of concern, I think is the most politically correct label at the moment. And they also suggested it'd be great to have a photo, the way that we have for anaphylaxis information or for epilepsy information. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to do that within trying to fit it all on 2 pages. But if anyone can show me how to do it, that'd be great. Okay. All right, and since then I've had ongoing feedback from participants, teachers and school counsellors at 15 teacher workshops and 10 school counsellor and psychologist workshops that I've run in New South Wales, Queensland, Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania. And I'm also running workshops. I've just been doing 2 days of teacher workshops, also running one, a school counsellor one here on Monday, and then going on to Perth and Auckland a bit later in the year. So there's this constant review process going on. But certainly there are lots of schools that are now using this profile. So the good thing about the profile is that it's free, which is something that most schools are interested in, is free resources. So all you need to do is go to my website and click on the resources section, which is up the top there next to the boy looking away. And then the first thing is the ASD student profile. So that's in a PDF format, and if you'd like to adjust it, so sometimes schools are wanting to put their letterhead on it or add something so that they can use it for other students with special needs other than autism, then I'm really happy to send you a Word document, as long as there's a little line that says developed by Lydia at Autism Understanding. If you just change that to adapted from, that's no problem.